So I've got my this little mini sketchbook here, which I've done quite a bit in already. I really just kind of keep as sort of an art journal and draw whatever I'm inspired to draw, or to draw when I'm not inspired, so that it gives me some inspiration to work with. And so I've just got a few pages in here. I just have some real basic watercolors here, and this is not really thick paper, so I have to be a little bit sensitive with how much water I put on the page at a time, but it holds up fairly well, and I'm only going over all the line work is done with just a ballpoint pen. This happens to be a Pilot black ballpoint pen, nothing really fancy. And I've got this robot here on the left hand side, and I want it to start with kind of like a golden yellow color here, sort of thinking of like a bumblebee, but also it could be more like a Gundam or a Pacific Rim Guardian type robot. And I just felt like going with the yellow. I'm gonna go over this with a few other different colors and shades, but just kind of starting by giving everything sort of a base mid-tone yellow here. I like these kind of just sort of craft section watercolors. This happens to be Praying, I think, from the dollar store, but I like the ones that have the lid that opens up like this, and you can use it as a mixing tray. So it's nice, I think. I like just sort of starting with a base mid-tone. It gives everything kind of a nice silhouette, and then really depends on what I'm feeling where I go from there. I've got a paint towel here to dab off a little bit of water, and I had some sort of grayish blues. I got a little bit of green already mixed here on the tray. I'm just pulling from that to do some of this smoke or clouds or something behind this figure. I have to remind myself every once in a while to think more intentionally about sketchbooks this way. Is that this is my playground. This is my area to experiment, to play, to find out what doesn't work as much as what does work. To experiment with maybe different color patterns or rendering styles. So I've got a little bit of color on here, and a lot of times when I get about that much water on a page, I'll go to the next page if I have something drawn on there already, and I'm going to stick with some of this golden yellow color here, I think, and do this kind of sunset behind the castle. These illustrations are made with really very few lines, and I intentionally try to sort of keep them low fidelity as far as like detail, because I have a very small space. It actually just helps me more quickly get the things that are in my head out onto paper, even if they're not sort of the ideal expression of those ideas. It gives me a thumbnail and a visual archive of my own ideas that I can sort of skim back through later on, maybe get an idea for a painting or another use for an illustration or something like that, and do another version, a better version of it, a higher fidelity version of it. I'm gonna grab a little bit more. No, I was gonna grab blue, but I think I'm going to keep this whole palette on this side more warm, and grab some orange, mixed in with a little bit of red that I had there on the tray, and then come back in here. Some of these sunset colors back here in the sky. Put some orange underneath the clouds here, and then I'll use that same orange on these other panels. This is another thing that I do, sort of like on this meta scale, where I'm already using a very small form factor canvas with these very small sketchbooks, and then I will do like this multi-panel or multi-column layouts and do micro paintings inside these. These are like landscapes, so I take one vertical page and make 3 horizontal thumbnail sketch landscapes, and it's basically just getting the forms and the overall color pattern or color scheme and temperature or silhouette that I want to capture. And it might be for something, you know, an actual project I'm working on with a client, and this just gives me sort of a fast way to iterate on ideas without getting trapped into too much detail too early on. And if they're just my own ideas, like I said before, it's just sort of like a rapid fire visual brainstorm session, where sometimes the ideas that are coming to my head are coming as fast as I'm putting pen on paper, and I don't know what always to expect. So I'm just using some of that red orange that's still on my brush and giving everything in the foreground here kind of a glaze, because I'm thinking I want it to all be darker, but I'm still kind of making up my mind about it while I put a little bit of paint on the paper, because I know that I want to have it all like this warm tone. And since I already had it on my brush, most of the time things in the foreground are going to be darker and more saturated, and things in the background are going to be lighter and less saturated. There's more atmosphere between that starts to gray things out. So the foreground here, I'm really just kind of giving a sort of like I did with the robot over here, where I just used the yellow to reinforce the silhouette, give it an overall hue, and do a little bit of contrast color. So we got the gold and the blue in the background. Let it dry while I work on these micro paintings here. And then already I've got this sort of, you know, kind of rich, you know, that maybe these things are related, maybe they're not. Maybe this is the environment in which this character or mechanized giant machinery thing occupies this kind of world here, or maybe they're just, you know, just a collection of random ideas that are not related. So sometimes I get story ideas that way from looking at, well, maybe these things go together, maybe this is one of the villages or towns or something that this character comes from. So I just find it intriguing to myself to stumble across inspiration that way for all kinds of things. But I do like to illustrate, even if it's more in my head, and maybe it fails to come out sometimes in the execution of a drawing, but I tend to think in my head in sort of concepts and stories and characters, rather than drawing what I think are cool shapes. That comes sort of secondary. And then to contrast that and sort of contradict myself, there are other times where just the process of doing art is what's appealing to me. So just the activity of putting some sort of physical medium like acrylic paint on a canvas is what's enjoyable, and that's what I want to kind of be saturated in. And so there's different art forms that kind of come about out of that. Keen and interested in like workflow and technique. So I kind of have to be mindful of both, because if I do artwork in a professional capacity where I have deadlines and people who don't, you know, what they need most of the time as fast as possible is the minimum viable product. So what is it that gets the idea across with the least amount of effort and the least amount of time? And often that is a thumbnail sketch. It's not a beautiful photoshopped rendering, although that may come swiftly after sort of an initial thumbnail. But if the idea is wrong from the beginning, you want to be able to tell without putting too much effort and time into the illustration or concept or story or whatever it happens to be. So there's our first one up there. Castle with some trees and the sunset. And then I have mountains. I had dipped into some of this purple, so I'm getting some complementary colors in here. This yellow and orange. Now I'm getting some purple with the more shadowy areas, and then this second thumbnail landscape, I have some mountains in the background and some cliff kind of areas. So I'm using some of that purple for that, and then I'll use more warm colors coming towards the front. Get back into the orange there. And that is about all it needs. Really like that contrast with the purples and oranges and yellows. And while that set of little micro paintings dries, I can go back and start working on the mech here.